So I was going through the stack of source materials for today's deep dive, just, parsing through the usual mix of research notes and historical context, when I hit a title that caused a genuine, physical reaction.
Oh, I know exactly which one you're talking about.
Right. I mean, it literally made me freeze mid-scroll.
hmm
The title of the primary text we are unpacking today for you all is, quote, "Overwhelming Proof That God Does Not Exist."
Yeah, that's quite a statement to just drop on a desk.
Exactly. My immediate visceral response was to just brace for impact. I assumed I was about to read an angry, edgy, new atheist tip piece.
Which, to be fair, is a completely understandable defense mechanism.
Yeah, totally.
A title like that doesn't exactly invite casual contemplation. It reads like a declaration of war against the foundational beliefs of billions of people.
That's exactly how it felt. I thought it was going to be one of those combative manifestos designed purely to mock religion and, farm internet outrage.
Right, the kind of thing you see on angry forums.
Yes. But the actual text we are looking at is the absolute polar opposite of a hit piece.
It really is. It takes a completely different route.
It does. The deeper I got into the sources, the more I realized this isn't an anti-religion rant at all. It is a meticulous, deeply philosophical, and remarkably scientific deconstruction of the concept of a deity.
And we really need to emphasize who is making this argument.
Yes, because the person making this argument isn't a secular materialist sitting in a university lounge somewhere. He is a profoundly spiritual figure.
Which is where we need to clearly define the mission of our analysis for you today. We are looking at a thought experiment.
A very intense thought experiment.
Exactly. The author of our source material is taking the raw, internal definitions of the major world religions, like the actual dogma and scriptures, and putting them on trial.
Putting them right on the stand.
Right. He is applying a cold, logical framework to see if the concept of a personal, distinct God entity holds up to the very definitions those religions provide themselves.
And because we are diving into theology and logic, which are, inherently sticky subjects, we need to establish our own role in this.
Definitely. Ground rules are important here.
Right. So we are stepping into this thought experiment as impartial observers. I want you to think of us as court reporters sitting in the gallery of a conceptual courtroom.
Just taking notes.
Exactly. We aren't here to endorse a specific religious view, nor are we here to attack anyone's faith. Our job is strictly to unpack the mechanics of this startling logical argument.
We are just mapping out the chain of logic, right?
Yeah.
Evaluating the witnesses on the stand and seeing where the preponderance of evidence leads.
Right. And the courtroom framing is essential here because it strips away the cultural and emotional armor that usually surrounds these kinds of conversations.
It really does. In this trial, the witnesses are the traditions themselves.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. We have science. We have Islam. We have Hinduism. We have Buddhism. Each is called to the stand to provide its highest, most refined definition of ultimate reality.
But before we bring out those witnesses, we have to talk about the judge presiding over this trial.
Oh, yes. We have to introduce the messenger?
Because his background is entirely counterintuitive to the thesis he's presenting. The sources introduce a figure named Osman. And his title alone forces you to pause and recalibrate.
It really does.
He is known as the blind Muslim Yogi.
The juxtaposition of those three identifiers is just fascinating.
It's like a walking Venn diagram of things that don't normally go together.
Right. I mean, you have the Islamic background, which is deeply rooted in Middle Eastern Abrahamic monotheism.
Which is all about submission to a singular creator.
Exactly. Then you have the mastery of Eastern yoga, a tradition stemming from ancient India that frequently emphasizes non-dualism and the dissolution of the self.
Completely different universe, philosophically.
Completely. And then you add to that his blindness, which completely alters how a human being interacts with the physical and spatial world.
These are identities that usually occupy entirely different, philosophical universes. They don't sit at the same table.
Let alone in the same person.
Right. But what anchors Osman's authority in this discussion isn't just a clever combination of titles. It is an almost terrifying level of discipline.
Terrifying is the right word for it.
The text outlines a resume that is actually difficult to fully comprehend. He has 50 years of dedicated practice as a bioenergy healer and yogi.
50 years?
Half a century. But it's the daily volume that really caught my attention. At certain stages of his life, he was practicing up to 18 hours a day.
Which is just biologically staggering.
And currently, after half a century, He is still practicing 8 to 10 hours every single day.
Consider the physiological and neurological implications of that kind of sustained effort. We frequently hear about the 10,000-hour rule, right?
Oh yeah, for achieving mastery in a given field,
Yeah.
like chess or playing the violin or learning a new language.
Exactly. Osman has bypassed that metric completely. He is operating at a 100,000-hour level.
It's incomprehensible. It's like an Olympic athlete or a concert pianist, but for consciousness.
Exactly. When someone applies that degree of singular obsessive focus to the manipulation of consciousness and bioenergy, they're going to physically alter their neuroplasticity.
They're rewiring the hardware.
Yes, they are mapping territories of human perception that most people don't even know exist.
And the results of that discipline materialized incredibly early.
Huh.
The sources document that by the age of 19, Osman attained his first state of samadhi.
Which is huge.
It is. But we should probably clarify what that actually means, because in modern Western culture, the word yoga has been severely diluted.
No, absolutely. It's become a fitness class where you stretch for an hour and feel a bit more relaxed.
Right. You wear expensive pants and drink a smoothie.
Yeah.
That is not what a 19-year-old is experiencing when he hits samadhi.
Not at all. Samadhi is the absolute pinnacle of the traditional yogic path.
Okay, break that down for us, mechanically.
Mechanically speaking, it is a profound, altered state of consciousness where the default mode network of the brain basically goes quiet.
And the default mode network is the part responsible for your sense of a separate, continuous self, right?
Exactly. It's the ego center. The rigid boundary between the observer and the observed environment just collapses. It is a state of total absorption and undifferentiated oneness.
The source material actually draws a direct comparison to Paramahansa Yogananda's autobiography of a yogi to help contextualize this.
That's a great reference point.
Yeah, because when figures like Yogananda or Osman describe these states of cosmic consciousness, they aren't describing a vivid dream or like a chemically induced hallucination.
No, they treat it as empirical data.
Right. They are describing the act of stepping into a more fundamental, higher order of reality.
But Osman introduces a critical distinction here that really separates him from typical spiritual teachers.
And this is where it gets interesting.
He actively rejects the label of mystic.
Which is wild, given his resume.
Right. He insists that his approach, despite dealing with cosmic consciousness and bioenergy, is fundamentally scientific.
Now, I found myself genuinely pushing back on that claim while reading. I mean, how does a blind yogi who claims to enter states of cosmic oneness and utilize bioenergy fields get to claim the mantle of science?
It sounds a bit like a contradiction, right?
Yeah. It sounds like we were just taking ancient mysticism and dressing it up in a lab coat to make it sound credible.
Well, the difference lies in the search for the mechanism of action. A mystic is often content to leave a phenomenon shrouded in mystery, attributing it to divine grace or magic.
Like, it just happens because the universe willed it.
Right. But Osman approaches these protocols, like breath work, extreme meditation, energy manipulation, as a lost, archaic science of human physiology.
He's looking for the levers and pulleys.
Exactly. He strips away the incense, the cultural rituals, and the religious dogma to isolate the mechanical levers of the nervous system.
The sources actually compare this methodology to someone like Dr. Andrew Huberman.
That's a really apt comparison.
Yeah, because Huberman takes ancient practices like Yoga Nidra and explains the exact neurobiological mechanisms that make them work.
Or even someone like Swami Sivananda, who brought a rigorous, almost medical systematic approach to spirituality. Osman is looking for the structural laws of the system, not a magical intervention.
That distinction completely reframes how we enter this thought experiment. We are dealing with a practitioner who demands a mechanical, result-based understanding of the universe.
Which explains the incredibly demanding ground rule he sets before the trial even begins.
Right. If we want to evaluate the existence of God, we have to establish a prerequisite for the jury. So for you listening, this is the rule you have to follow.
And it's a tough one. The prerequisite is the total removal of human emotion from the analysis.
Which is, asking a human being to check their emotion at the door when discussing the existence of God might be the most difficult intellectual exercise possible.
It goes against our very biology.
It does. Belief in a deity is rarely a sterile, academic proposition. It is inextricably tied to our deepest survival mechanisms.
It's tied to hope, fear, grief.
Exactly. It is tied to the hope that a lost parent is in a better place. It is tied to the terrifying realization of our own mortality. It forms the bedrock of community, morality, and cultural identity.
So to decouple all of that psychological weight and look at the concept coldly is a monumental ask.
It's massive.
Yeah.
But as the text argues, it is incredibly difficult. But it is the only way a logical proof functions.
Right. If fear of the dark or the desire for cosmic justice dictates the evidence, the trial is rigged from the start.
We have to treat the concept of a supreme distinct deity the same way a physicist treats a hypothesis about a new particle.
Exactly. Cold, calculated, empirical.
So with the emotional baseline neutralized, we can finally call the first witness to the stand. Witness number one is science.
The baseline empirical framework of the modern world.
Right. You observe a phenomenon, you measure it, you formulate a testable hypothesis, and you attempt to reproduce the results in a controlled environment.
And when you apply that uncompromising empirical standard to the claim that a personal, distinct God entity exists, the verdict from the laboratory is very swift.
It's a hard no.
Science defaults to non-existence. There is no measurable chemical signature of a creator. There is no physical footprint.
No mathematical anomaly in the laws of physics that requires an anthropomorphic deity to balance the equation.
The burden of proof is the key concept here. In any scientific or logical inquiry, the burden always rests entirely on the party making the positive claim.
The source material utilizes Carl Sagan's famous invisible dragon in the garage analogy for this, which I love. It perfectly illustrates this mechanism.
It's such a classic thought experiment. Walk us through it.
Okay, so imagine I claim there is a fire-breathing dragon living in my garage. You, as a rational person, will naturally ask to see it.
Right, show me the dragon.
But then I tell you, the dragon is invisible, so you might suggest we throw flour on the floor to catch its footprints.
Good scientific thinking.
But then I counter that the dragon actually floats in the air, so it won't leave footprints. Then you might suggest using an infrared camera to detect the heat of its fire.
Because it's a fire-breathing dragon.
Exactly. But I finally claim that the dragon's fire is entirely heatless.
And at a certain point, the definitions you are using to protect your claim render the dragon functionally meaningless.
Exactly.
An invisible, weightless, floating, heatless dragon that cannot be detected by any instrument ever devised is utterly indistinguishable from no dragon at all.
Precisely. Without extraordinary measurable evidence, the scientific method cannot validate the claim. So science, as a witness, testifies that based on a complete lack of empirical data, the personal God entity does not exist.
Now, most theologians or religious practitioners aren't actually threatened by that.
No, they have a workaround.
Right. The traditional truth is that science and religion occupied different domains, non-overlapping magisteria. Science measures the physical universe, while religion deals with the metaphysical, spiritual realm.
But this is where Osman executes a massive logical pivot that forms the core of this entire deep dive. It is expected that a laboratory will reject a deity.
Right, that's not surprising.
But what happens when you take that exact same cold empirical microscope, that exact demand for precise definitions, and you apply it to the most sacred foundational texts of the world's major religions?
This is where it gets really compelling. He calls his own tradition to the stand first. Islam is sworn in.
And the natural expectation here, given his background, is an apologetic defense. You'd expect him to defend how the Quran reveals a majestic creator whose mind is simply beyond human comprehension.
But he bypasses the apologetics entirely. He zeroes in on the core, unshakable dogma of Islamic theology regarding the nature of God.
The actual literal definition.
Yes. The absolute foundational definition provided by the tradition itself is that God is unseen. God is uncreated, never born, and never giving birth.
Yeah.
God is completely non-physical, occupies absolutely no space, and fundamentally is inconceivable.
Now, I struggled with this initially when I was reading the source.
How so?
Well, if we are looking at this logically, doesn't the word inconceivable just act as a placeholder for awe?
I see what you mean.
Isn't it just a poetic way of saying, this entity is so vast, so powerful, and so magnificent that my human nervous system just lacks the computational power to fully render it?
That is the emotional interpretation. But remember the prerequisite we set up earlier. We stripped the emotion away. We are looking at the actual mechanics of the definition.
Right, the cold hard logic.
Osman leverages a theological and philosophical concept known as the via negativa, the negative way.
The via negativa.
Yes, this is the attempt to describe the divine by asserting what it is not, because assigning any positive human attribute to it would automatically limit it.
So if you say God is angry, you are limiting God to a human biological emotion.
Exactly. Or if you say God sits on a throne, you are limiting God to the constraints of spatial dimensions and physical geometry. The via negativa strips all of that away.
It's defining by subtraction.
But Osman takes this concept to its absolute, literal conclusion. Imagine taking this Islamic definition into the laboratory we just discussed with the dragon.
Okay, bringing religion into the lab.
You walk in and tell the scientist, I have an entity here. It is entirely non-physical. It has no physical form whatsoever. It occupies zero space in the universe. It was never created. And it possesses no attributes that can be conceived of by a human mind.
The scientist is going to look at you and say, well, you just provided the functional dictionary definition of something that does not exist.
That is the devastating logical hook of his argument.
It really is a trap.
He is arguing that if you strip away the poetry and the human desire for a cosmic parent, the scripture itself is describing a total paradox.
An entity that possesses every single mechanical attribute of non-existence.
Exactly. If something is literally inconceivable, it means no concept of it can exist in reality. To treat this inconceivable reality as a distinct personality who listens to petitions, gets angry, or manipulates events is to violate the very definition the religion itself provided.
It is a stunning conclusion. I mean, he is using the rigor of the scripture to dismantle the believer's anthropomorphic habits. The text is describing a void of physical attributes, but humans keep trying to paint a face on it.
Which leads directly to the next witness. Because if Islam strips the deity of form and space, what happens when we examine a tradition that seems, on the surface at least, entirely obsessed with form?
Right. Osman calls Hinduism, or Sanatana Dharma, to the stand.
We have to establish a contrast here, because the general perception of Hinduism in the West is highly visual and profoundly dualistic.
Oh, totally. We picture thousands of colorful deities, intricate statues of Shiva and Vishnu, sprawling temples, and vivid mythological narratives.
It appears to be a religion crowded with distinct god entities.
Osman acknowledges that level of the tradition, right?
Yes, it is known as Dvaita, or dualism. In this framework, there is a hard, distinct separation between the human worshiper and the divine entity being worshipped. It is a relationship.
The sources include a brilliant analogy to clarify how this fits into the broader philosophy. Dualistic worship is compared to training wheels on a bicycle,
I love that analogy.
or stepping stones used to cross a rushing river. They are valid, functional, and deeply necessary for the vast majority of people to begin a spiritual journey.
Because human beings are wired for narrative.
Exactly. And physical attachment. We need something tangible. We need a face to look at, a story to internalize, a physical statue to anchor our wandering focus.
But the training wheels are a preparatory stage. They are not the pinnacle of the engineering. Osman directs our attention to the philosophical peak of Hindu thought, which is Advaita Vedanta.
And the word Advaita literally translates to not two.
Right. It is the doctrine of absolute non-dualism.
So the training wheels are removed, and the concept of separate entities entirely dissolves.
The sources reference historical giants like Sri Ramakrishna and his disciple Swami Vivekananda to anchor this point. Their teachings, representing the highest intellectual and experiential wisdom of the tradition, conclude that ultimate reality is Brahman.
And Brahman is not a creator deity sitting on a cloud.
No, it is pure, undifferentiated consciousness. It is a seamless, indivisible whole with absolutely no qualities, no attributes, and no separation from the rest of existence.
So mechanically speaking, how does this testify against the existence of God in our conceptual courtroom?
Well, if the ultimate nature of reality is an indivisible, infinite whole, then boundary conditions cannot exist.
Right.
A God entity implies a boundary. It implies an entity that is here while creation is there. It implies a subject-object relationship.
An I and a thou.
Exactly. But Advaita Vedanta states that this separation is the fundamental illusion, the maya that traps human consciousness. Therefore, at the absolute highest philosophical peak of Hinduism, the concept of a separate, distinct creator God logically cannot exist.
So the witness testifies to non-existence.
Yes.
Which is an incredible alignment between the empirical laboratory and the ancient ashram. Both conclude that the separate entity is an illusion.
And this naturally ushers in the fourth witness, a tradition that skips the apologetics, bypasses the training wheels entirely, and simply calls a spade from the very beginning.
Buddhism takes the stand.
Buddhism might be the most straightforward, uncooperative witness for anyone trying to prove a deity.
Yeah, the sources emphasize that Osman really appreciates Buddhism's explicit non-theistic architecture. There are no theological gymnastics required to parse what inconceivable means.
Right. The central doctrine that dismantled the idea of a creator in Buddhism is anatta, which translates to no self.
Let's break down the mechanics of anatta because it is very counterintuitive to Western thought.
Extremely.
We generally assume we have a permanent soul, right? Like a fixed, unchanging core identity that kind of rides around inside our bodies like a pilot in a mech suit.
Right, the ghost in the machine.
Buddhism looks at the human organism and says, no, you are a collection of shifting processes. You have physical form, you have sensations, you have perceptions, you have mental formations, and you have consciousness.
And these elements are constantly changing, interacting, and degrading.
Just as a chariot is not a single indivisible thing, but rather a temporary arrangement of wheels, axles, and wood, a human being is a temporary arrangement of biological and mental processes.
There is no permanent self hidden inside.
So the logical extrapolation of anatta is devastating to the concept of God.
It really is. Because if there is no permanent, unchanging self within the microcosm of a human being, the idea of a supreme, permanent, unchanging self, a creator God governing the macrocosm, is philosophically incoherent.
It violates the fundamental premise of how reality operates in that system.
Exactly. The historical Buddha's approach to this was ruthlessly pragmatic. When disciples or debate opponents would try to force him into metaphysical corners, asking if the universe was eternal or if a creator fashioned the cosmos, he would famously refuse to answer.
It actively discouraged the speculation.
Right. He utilized the parable of the poisoned arrow, which the text highlights.
Oh, that's such a striking parable.
He told his followers, "You are a man who has been shot with a poisoned arrow of suffering. Instead of letting the surgeon pull the arrow out and treat the wound, you are demanding to know the name of the man who shot it, what caste he belongs to, and what kind of wood the bow was made from."
And the tragic punchline is, you will die before you get the answers.
Exactly. He viewed the conceptualization of a God entity as a massive, dangerous distraction from the actual mechanics of achieving liberation.
So the Buddhist witness steps down from the stand, having testified that a creator entity not only doesn't exist, but that searching for one actively hinders human progress.
It's a very powerful testimony.
And just to finalize the gallery of witnesses, the sources briefly acknowledge the easiest, most predictable vote in the room, the atheist consensus.
Modern secular materialism obviously aligns completely with the non-existence premise from the very start.
So we have heard the testimony. Now the trial moves into the final phase. We have to weigh the scales of justice based on the preponderance of the evidence.
Right. Time for the verdict.
Imagine a massive, ancient set of brass scales. On the right side, we place the plaintiff, the party actively arguing that a distinct, personal, interactive God entity definitely exists.
Osman grants that Christianity is the primary representative for this side of the scale.
Christianity makes very clear, positive claims. You have the doctrine of the Trinity, you have the concept of incarnation, the belief that the creator of the cosmos literally took on physical human form, walked the earth, and altered history.
It is a robust, definitive claim of a personal entity.
So that heavy weight goes on the right side of the scale.
Now observe the left side of the scale, the defense. We place science with its strict requirement for measurable empirical proof.
Okay.
We place the foundational Islamic dogma defining ultimate reality as non-physical, occupying no space, and completely inconceivable.
Yep.
We place the highest philosophical realization of Hinduism, Advaita Vedanta, which declares reality to be an indivisible oneness with no separate deities.
Adding more weight.
We place the core Buddhist doctrine of anatta and its systemic rejection of a creator. And finally, we add the universal consensus of secular atheism.
When you look at those conceptual scales, the left side completely bottoms out. I mean, it crashes to the table. It isn't a marginal victory. It is an overwhelming imbalance.
And in a legal framework, you don't always need absolute mathematical certainty. You look for the preponderance of the evidence.
You look at the balance of probabilities.
Right. Osman's core thesis is that when you analyze global wisdom, hard logic, empirical science, and the highest peaks of major philosophical traditions, 80% or more of the evidence points entirely to the non-existence of a personal God entity.
Therefore, the definitive ruling of this thought experiment, the verdict handed down from the bench, is that the personal God entity does not exist.
Case closed.
But arriving at this verdict triggers the most critical paradox of this entire discussion.
It really does, because the entity is gone. The anthropomorphic creator has been logically erased. But consider who just handed down this verdict. Osman is a man who has dedicated 50 years of extreme ascetic discipline to spiritual practice.
He heals with bioenergy.
He enters states of profound samadhi.
So if he believes God doesn't exist, is he just a nihilist?
Right.
Does he believe we are simply biological accidents floating on a rock in a cold, dead, meaningless universe?
The answer is an emphatic, resounding no. And this is where the deep dive flips the script completely.
I found myself literally staring at this contradiction in the notes. How can a man harness quantum entanglement for telepathic healing, yet categorically deny the existence of a higher power? How is he not a materialist?
He avoids materialism through a profound paradigm shift regarding the nature of power itself. The key that unlocks his entire philosophy is the distinction between an entity and a mechanism.
Let's really explore that distinction because it fundamentally changes how a person interacts with the universe.
It's the core of his worldview.
Think about the law of gravity. Gravity is an invisible, omnipresent force. It dictates the architecture of galaxies, it holds planets in orbit, and it keeps your feet anchored to the ground. It is an immense, undeniable power.
Absolutely.
But you do not pray to gravity.
No, you don't.
You don't build a cathedral dedicated to gravity, and you don't sing hymns hoping it will show you mercy and prevent you from dropping your phone on the sidewalk.
Right. Because gravity has no personality. It possesses no ego.
Exactly.
It doesn't demand allegiance. It doesn't get angry when you ignore it. And it doesn't require complex rituals to function. It is a pure mechanism.
Exactly. Or look at electricity. Electricity is a profound, invisible force that courses through the world. It can illuminate a massive city, or it can stop a human heart in a fraction of a second.
Immense power.
But we don't worship it as a distinct entity. We don't try to appease the god of electricity.
You don't sacrifice things to your fuse box.
Right. Instead, we study it. We learn its unbending laws, voltage, current, resistance. We build conduits and transformers. We harness its mechanics to light up the darkness.
And Osman views universal energy, cosmic consciousness, or whatever you want to call the underlying fabric of reality in the exact same mechanical way.
This is a breathtaking reorientation of spirituality.
It really is. He is stating that, yes, there is an immense, inconceivable underlying reality. There is a unified field of bioenergy. There are quantum connections that bind all biological life together.
But humanity has made a critical error by personifying it. We have taken a cosmic law of physics and dressed it up in the robes of a human king.
That's beautifully put. He is rejecting the king, but he is keeping the power. He is refusing to bow to a person, but he is relentlessly learning to harness the force.
And when you connect this mechanistic worldview back to his biography, a fascinating hypothesis emerges regarding his blindness.
This was one of the most illuminating points in the source material for me.
How does losing your sight actually give you an advantage in understanding this inconceivable reality? It seems like a huge deficit.
Well, consider how much of human religious experience is entirely dependent on the visual cortex.
Okay.
Religion is traditionally transmitted through visual forms. We construct soaring cathedrals with intricate stained glass to inspire awe. We carve statues of saints and paint agonizing portraits of martyrs.
We read the physical text of holy books. We observe the ornate robes of the priesthood and the choreography of the rituals.
Exactly. The entire architecture of worship is designed for the eyes.
And a massive percentage of our brain's computational power is dedicated purely to rendering that visual world. So if you remove visual input entirely,
You are violently stripped of the forms. You can no longer be seduced by the aesthetics of the mythology.
wow.
You cannot mistake the statue for the energy it represents. So what are you left with? When the visual noise is silenced, you are left with internal sensation.
The actual feeling.
Yes. You are left with the subtle vibration of the nervous system. You are left with somatic feeling and pure, unobstructed logic. Osman's blindness may have acted as a radical filter.
It forced him to look past the symbols.
It allowed him to discard the visual face of God, freeing up the computational power necessary to intimately map and feel the underlying force.
Because he couldn't see the idol, he had no choice but to feel the energy in the room. He was forced to transition from external worship to internal protocol.
Precisely.
Which brings us to the ultimate question of utility for the listener. Why does this dense philosophical deconstruction of theology matter to someone going about their daily life?
It matters deeply because it offers profound psychological relief.
Really from what?
It provides an escape route from cognitive dissonance.
Ah, cognitive dissonance. The mental friction you experience when you are forced to hold two deeply conflicting beliefs at the same time.
Right. And in our modern era, an enormous portion of the population is torn in half by this.
Absolutely.
On one side, they possess a rational intellect shaped by biology, physics, and the scientific method. That intellect looks at the Bronze Age concept of a literal guy in the sky who parts clouds, floods planets, and monitors human behavior. And the intellect rightly says, well, that makes absolutely no logical sense.
But on the other side of that friction, there is a deep intuitive spiritual yearning.
Yes. A very real human desire to connect with something larger than the self, to experience awe, and to acknowledge the profound mystery of consciousness.
But society often presents a false binary for us. You either have to be a cold, rational atheist and completely deny the mystery, or you have to be a faithful believer and actively suppress your own intellect to accept the dogma.
Osman's verdict offers a brilliant truce between those two warring halves of the modern mind.
A truce. I like that.
He is essentially saying your rational intellect is entirely correct. The guy in the sky does not exist. The laboratory, the core logic of Islam, the highest peaks of Hinduism and Buddhism, they all agree with your skepticism.
But he also validates the spiritual yearning.
Exactly. The inconceivable energy field is real. The quantum entanglement of consciousness is real. You can completely reject the anthropomorphic deity, abandon the guilt of doubt, and still be a profoundly spiritual person.
It is an incredibly liberating framework. But, and this is a big but, it also demands a radical shift in personal responsibility.
It really does, because if the universe is a mechanism rather than a benevolent parent, it isn't going to swoop in and save you.
Right. So what is the practical application here? Am I just supposed to sit around feeling quantum all day? How do I actually use a mechanistic universe?
The sources use an analogy here that bridges the gap between high philosophy and practical action. They compare Osman's approach to bioenergy to Tony Robbins' approach to human psychology.
Specifically, the science of state change.
Right. If you look at how Tony Robbins approaches human performance, it is entirely mechanistic.
He doesn't tell people to sit quietly in a corner and passively pray for the universe to grant them confidence or success.
No, he treats human emotion as a biological protocol. He says if you want to feel confident, you have to physically change your physiology.
You alter your posture. You change your breathing patterns. You aggressively shift your focus.
He moves the individual from a state of passive belief into a state of active protocol.
And Osman is applying that exact same mechanistic rigor to spirituality and healing.
Exactly. You don't wait for a deity to capriciously intervene in your physical illness or mental distress. You take active agency over your own bioenergetic field.
You learn the specific breathing protocols, the meditative focuses, and the somatic practices that tune your nervous system to access that underlying energy.
And doing that requires immense sustained effort. Which brings us to Osman's favorite phrase documented in the sources.
Right, sharpening the sword.
It is a sobering metaphor. It implies that consciousness, focus, and bioenergetic capability are not passive gifts permanently bestowed upon you by a creator.
They are instruments.
They are tools that degrade over time. Like any fine blade, if you leave it out in the rain or if you neglect it, it will dull and rust.
It requires daily, meticulous maintenance. It reminds us why this man, after 50 years of mastery, is still practicing 8 to 10 hours a day.
He is constantly at the whetstone.
He is honing his nervous system's ability to tap into that quantum reality, refusing to let the blade dull.
This dedication to the craft naturally leads to the practical reality of how he disseminates this knowledge.
The business model side of things.
Yes. The sources outline his specific operational model, which brings up an interesting dynamic regarding the ethics of healing and commerce.
Right. If you want to learn the underlying philosophy, if you want to understand the mechanics of the via negativa, or how to begin sharpening your own sword, that information is completely democratized.
It is free.
He hosts a YouTube channel and a podcast on platforms like Apple and Spotify under the name The Blind Muslim Yogi. He gives the foundational blueprints away.
However, the direct, one-on-one bioenergy healing, the specific, targeted application of his 50 years of practice for critical care, that operates as a premium service.
Patients access this through his website, yoganist786.com. And it's natural for some people to bristle at that.
Oh, definitely.
There is an ingrained societal expectation that if something is spiritual, it should be free. They might argue, well, if he's just channeling universal energy, why is there a paywall?
But the source material provides a highly pragmatic counter-perspective. You are not paying for the universal energy itself, just as you don't pay a toll to use gravity.
Right.
You are paying for the 50 years of grueling, obsessive, 18-hour-a-day expertise required to harness that energy safely and effectively.
The analogy they provide in the text is excellent. It is like hiring a veteran pilot to fly you through a massive storm.
Exactly. When you buy the ticket, you aren't paying for the sky.
And you aren't paying for the aerodynamics that keep planes aloft. You are paying for the pilot's decades of muscle memory.
You are paying for their ability to read the instruments and make split-second adjustments when severe turbulence hits.
Osman is offering himself as the veteran pilot of the bioenergetic field.
And there is a crucial ethical disclaimer attached to this practice that further highlights his mechanistic mindset.
This is very important.
Osman explicitly states that his bioenergy work is a complement to modern medicine, not a replacement for it.
He's not a faith healer telling vulnerable people to throw away their chemotherapy medication or ignore their doctors.
Which demonstrates a profound respect for the mechanisms of biology. He is essentially saying, let the allopathic doctors handle the chemical and structural mechanics of the body, and I will handle the bioenergetic mechanics.
It is a parallel protocol utilizing two different sets of tools to address the human organism.
We have covered a vast, complex terrain today.
We really have. We established the courtroom. We listened to science-demand empirical data. We saw Islam strip the deity of form and space.
We watched Hinduism dissolve the boundary of the self into a seamless whole, and Buddhism reject the permanent soul entirely.
We weighed the preponderance of evidence and arrived at the verdict that the personal God entity does not exist.
But as we conclude this analysis, we have to look closely at what remains when the concept of the entity is removed.
Right. Arriving at the conclusion of non-existence does not mean the lights have been turned off in the universe. It is not an invitation to nihilism.
No, it is the exact opposite. It means the localized concept of a king sitting in a defined castle somewhere in the sky is replaced by a vast, boundless, inconceivable field of potential.
The source material quotes the great Sufi mystic Rumi to synthesize this exact transition.
Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there.
By using logic to systematically prove that God cannot exist as a limited, definable entity, Osman isn't destroying the sacred.
He is liberating it.
He is liberating it from the tiny boxes human beings keep trying to shove it into. He is pointing us toward a reality that is infinitely more intimate, far more pervasive, and far more powerful than any distinct thing could ever be.
It is the ultimate transition from worshiping a form to actively experiencing a presence.
Which brings me full circle to that initial visceral reaction I had when I first read the title of this paper.
The panic.
Yeah, the panic. I froze because I thought I was looking at an attack. I thought I was looking at an X-ray of a broken bone, a definitive jagged line proving the death of human spirituality.
But you weren't.
No, I wasn't looking at an X-ray. I was looking through a telescope at a universe much larger and much more mysterious than the categories I was trying to force it into.
It leaves us with a fascinating and perhaps vital paradox to consider as we close the book on this trial.
Yes, and I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to mull over, a thought derived directly from the convergence of everything we examined today. If the highest, most refined wisdom of Islamic theology, the peak non-dual philosophy of Hinduism, the rigorous empiricism of modern science, and the foundational pragmatic doctrines of Buddhism all ultimately agree on one thing:
That the true ultimate reality is completely nameless, entirely inconceivable, and entirely beyond form.
then why has humanity spent so much of its history going to war over the name?
Why do we continue to spill so much blood fighting over the specific shape of a reality that has no form?
If no one can own an entity that logically does not exist, then maybe, just maybe, that very emptiness, that vast, inconceivable, formless field, is the only true common ground humanity actually shares. I highly encourage you to explore the original materials, check out the resources from the blind Muslim Yogi, and weigh the preponderance of the evidence for yourself. Court is officially adjourned.